And I'd like to begin by turning to each table and asking if people have guests and if they would introduce them. So let me begin. I guess we're in we'll go to the left. Oh, well, if we can begin at the middle table, if you would introduce yourself and your guest.
So, my guest is my wife, Deb Dunstone, and I'm going to hand this to Lynn, who has two other guests.
I have two guests, Leanne Sievert and Deborah Harsha.
Welcome. Welcome.
Back here? Oh, of course.
I'm Jack Urban, and I have my guest is my son, Sam, who's sitting next to me right here. So, welcome him.
Welcome.
Behind you.
Well, I could introduce my wife, but she's not here. Dara Strauss.
Would you like me to sit down and fill in?
She flew
There we
the
go.
coop. She flew the coop. But anyway, she'll be all right.
And at our table over here, we have some friends of Sharon and mine who are familiar with our speaker this evening. We have Keith Jones and the missing party at this table as well. Where is Janet? Oh, she's moved over here.
She's moved.
Okay. Yeah, so anyway, we're glad to have a couple of guests of our own. And now David's guest
Thank you. And
has returned.
Dara Strauss is here.
oh. And anyone at this table? No. Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and I have true confessions to tell. Last year, the last meeting, we ran a bit behind, as you may remember. The parking lot was jammed, and we got about an hour behind, and mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I remember I have a Catholic education buried in me. I forgot to introduce guests. So I am very sorry, very sorry. Impeachment. Oh, my fault. So I'm very sorry. I can't believe I committed that faux pas, but I did. So I'll be honest about it. So next, before we move into our program with Jack Urban, one of the duties of the vice president and incoming president for next year is to assemble the program. And Tom Dietz heroically volunteered last fall to take on that duty. So he has a report, and I would like to turn the mic over to him.
I don't have any confiteors to add here, but I do have to come up with some programs, and I've had really good response from our members. I have about 7 programs and a couple people who've said, if you really need a program, but there are people who've given programs fairly recently. So if you have not given a program, if you have not been one of our guest speakers in perhaps the last 3 to 5 years, please, we have this wonderful little booklet that Jim has placed at our tables. It has my address in it, my email address, and I would really like to hear from a couple more people rather than, I mean, I know David has said he'll do 2 or 3 if I need them, but so yeah, no, this is David here. But so anyway, that is the only thing I have to say tonight. But I'd like to get this program together by March. So if you really have something you want to share with us, this is your opportunity. Please do so, and just send me an email.
Okay, thank you, Tom, and volunteers can report afterwards or use email. Well, tonight, our speaker is about Jack Urban, speaking about architects and their clients. Whoops, are you picking up? So, introducing Jack is, I've known Jack for, I guess, almost 50 years. Sometime back when I first arrived in Kalamazoo in the early 70s, I met Jack and his wife, Carol. And so have fond memories of many years with the Urbans. I sent Jack an email late asking him, for a bio sketch. So if you are a speaker, it's always helpful to have a bio sketch. But through the wonders of the internet, we can discover all kinds of things about people. As you learned the last time, I Googled Barbara Walters and discovered extraordinary things about her. So actually, I found there are a number of Jack Urbans out there, but our Jack Urban, well, he sent me an email today, and he said, well, for the introduction, most of the basic stuff about me everybody knows, that I worked at Upjohn as a chemical engineer and was the owner, quote unquote, of several projects that involved designers. One was to build a plant to manufacture bovine growth hormone, a lovely project in which I got everything I wanted, $22 million, in which I had to work with designers and then make a number of design compromises. It all worked out well, technically, but never made Upjohn a dime. The FDA didn't approve our new drug application. Very exciting to be at the center of something like that. So it was true confessions. Well, I looked up Jack on Google and tapped into my memory bank, and Jack is much too modest. Jack is, as we know, a scientist by education and profession, and a public servant who exemplifies citizen engagement. By origin, he's an Easterner, graduating as a chemical engineer from Lehigh University in my home state of Pennsylvania, and then earning his PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Maryland, College Park in 1967. He came to Kalamazoo to join the Upjohn Company as a scientist in 1967, and more than 30 years later retired as an associate director at what was then called Pharmacia. After that, bored, I guess, with retirement, he taught at KVC for 5 years, teaching chemistry, and then found a new calling, a second career of civic engagement and public service. Early in 2007, Jack was elected as a county commissioner and served 7 years striving to draw the urbanized, the suburbanized, and the rural areas into a synergistic relationship of mutual respect and help. Since 2013, he has been an elected city commissioner of Kalamazoo, our city, and has focused on transportation and enhancing building a vibrant downtown. While Jack was busy on the county commission and then the city commission, he's also somehow or another found time to serve as president of the Kalamazoo River Cleanup Coalition, chair of the Kalamazoo County Public Art Commission, board member of the Kalamazoo County Parks Foundation, a member of the Community Action Agency, and on and on. Does he ever sleep? As we're up here in the Park Club, look out. And I tempted to say, in tribute to another famous architect, Christopher Wren, if you seek his monument, look about you. You've made an extraordinary difference for our county and our city. Jack says he was inspired to develop tonight's presentation by reading a recent book about the famous Glass House, one of the most famous pieces of modern architecture in the country, that was built in Plano, Illinois, just after World War II. It was designed by one of the famous modernist architects, a refugee from Weimar, Germany, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, commissioned by Dr. Elizabeth Farnworth. The clash the architect and the client had ended up in a famous and well-publicized lawsuit. And reading the book, says Jack, he called to mind other architect-client relationships, including our own. So this is in reference to his delightful late wife, Carol. Jack wrote, Carol and I have been both fascinated by outstanding architecture and architects, Carol especially. Our house was redesigned by Gordy Rogers in the 1970s to turn it from a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house into a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with no expansion of the building footprint and not adding another story. So naturally, we were in awe of him. When we expressed a preference for a chocolate-colored rug for the living room, Gordy replied, "It'll suck up all the light." Well, then right there, we corrected ourselves. All right, no dark colors, please. Over the years, he writes, Carol and I have collected architect-client stories in the course of our travels. There is such intensity and creativity at play in projects that will be lived in or tower over the skyline for decades. There is so much money, ego, and adventure riding on them that there is often a lot of drama, too. I hope to share an example of that with you this evening. So, Jack says, if I have time, I'll share a little secret about Lakeshore Tower Apartments in Chicago along the Lakeshore Drive that a local architect revealed to me at a cocktail party shortly after we moved to Kalamazoo. So that and other stories are to come. So this should be a very fun, stimulating, typical Torch evening. And I just, can't resist making a modernist joke. People who live in glass houses shouldn't. So Jack Urban, welcome, and the mic is yours.
Okay, I'm going to try the lavalier mic here first. Yeah. Okay, is this working okay? Ah, okay, good. Let me see if I can get this to work now. No, it's going to come back. No, it's thinking about it. Well, it's showing up there. I've got to get it to show up here. Well, let's see what happens if I try to advance the slides. Okay. Well, okay, I don't have to see it on the screen. Well, Alex Beam has written a brilliant account of a famous and fascinating client-architect relationship titled Broken Glass. And it's really rich. It's really worth reading. It's the story of the conception, the construction, and the completion of a live-in work of art. I'm referring to the Farnsworth House. It's a story of the immensely creative and ultimately unsatisfying relationship between Mies van der Rohe, the architect, and Dr. Edith Farnsworth, his client. Or was she his patron? We'll see. Almost a year ago, my sister-in-law and I traveled to Plano, just west of Chicago, to see for ourselves what all the fuss was about. The house, now owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, is open to the public for tours between Wednesday and Sunday in warm weather. And it's worth the trip. And if you want to go on a field trip with me, I'll go there again, and I'll just drive you there. It's worth a day trip, and it can be done in a day. It's one thing to view this house from the outside. It's quite another to view the outside from the inside. But it's not everybody's kind of house. There's Mies van der Rohe in 1958. So he's a tall person, very distinguished, likes his cigars, likes his martinis, but hasn't mastered English terrifically well. Well, partly due to the acclaim of Alex Beam's book, and the great changes in appreciation for women's roles in the last half century, this unique structure that I had just shown there is now called the Edith Farnsworth House. It's very clear this is not just the Farnsworth House; it's the Edith Farnsworth House, and I think that change was very appropriate, and I think you'll find out why. Well, why wasn't it named the Mies van der Rohe House? Well, he designed it, he supervised its construction, and approved or tried to approve all of the furnishings inside of it. Two better known buildings that could have been named after him are the Twin Tower apartments on Lakeshore Drive. Pretty familiar with those. Actually, there are two glass houses. The first one was designed by Philip Johnson and was built on a hilltop in New Canaan, Connecticut. Johnson saw the model for what was to become the Farnsworth House at the Museum of Modern Art in 1948, copied the design concept, and got it built first. And I'll show you a picture of it later. But it was never lived in. Johnson tried to sleep in it one night and got scared over its lack of privacy and decamped to a more conventional house on the same site. Philip Johnson is also, he's another famous architect. He's the one with the big round black glasses. Recall pictures of him? That's Philip Johnson. He's a popularizer of architecture, but a bit of a fad surfer and a magpie, according to what I've read. The second house, the one we're discussing this evening, is much more interesting because of the personalities involved and because of its centrality in any discussion of the international style in domestic architecture. This is the Edith Farnsworth House I'm talking about. It's a distillation of the design concepts which were birthed in the Bauhaus movement in Germany, a reduction of them to their essence. It's what Mies, Walter Gropius, and Le Corbusier had been seeking for decades, and it actually got built, as opposed to lots of other grand or fanciful architectural ideas that are out there. What makes this place special? Well, the personalities and the times. Both Mies and Edith were sophisticated, strong-willed people who could express themselves with eloquence, nuance, and force. He through his designs, and she through her perfectionism in all she undertook. Her study of violin performance, in her medical research, in her translations of Italian poetry, and the way she wanted to have respite from the stress of professional and city life. So how did this project come about, and why did it achieve such notoriety? It's a great story. It's a roller coaster for me to read it. It really was. So let's start with Mies. He was the son of a prosperous stonemason. Early on, he attracted the attention of noted German architects of the 1920s through his beautiful draftsmanship. His early projects relied on masonry. They had clean, straight lines, but looked ponderous. On the other hand, his conceptual renderings were full of light, drawing heavily on the use of glass and steel. They looked modern, fitting for the post-World War I age of electricity, cars, and airplanes. He was on the faculty of the Bauhaus, an experimental school that combined arts and crafts and architecture in a unified field of study that broke with tradition. Walter Gropius started it, and Mies ended up being in charge of it when the Nazis made clear that if he didn't shut it down, they would. During this period, Ludwig Mies, which means meth in German, gave himself a new name, Mies van der Rohe, taking the last name from his wife's family name. His design was chosen to represent the new Germany at an exposition held in Barcelona in 1929. I want to advance some slides here. All right, there's Edith Farnsworth and a grainy photograph of Mies. There's older Edith Farnsworth, probably about the time she retired. Okay, this is the German pavilion in Barcelona as reconstructed. It was taken down a year after it was built, and some architectural devotees managed to fund a replacement for it. It was bare on the inside, but just outside, a statue of a female nude stood in a reflecting pool. The layout consisted of a series of travertine panels which directed visitors from the streets of Barcelona into the interior of the whole exposition campus. Expensive materials, shiny chromed columns, and a thin cantilevered roof invited one to step into the modern era. Now, the precursor of Mies's domestic architecture, his houses, was his design of the Tugendhat house, which is in Brno, Czech Republic. And the person who lives in our house now has visited this site. She's from Czechoslovakia, and she's quite proud of her heritage there. She's been in this house since it's been refurbished, and it's now kind of like a museum. So I think that's kind of neat. Well, this Tugendhat house, I would say that Fritz had the money, and his wife Greta had the enthusiasm to let Mies have his way with this house. I mean, Fritz was very wealthy, but very conventional, and Greta was the one who really let Mies do what he wanted. And Fritz, I think, wanted to keep his wife happy, or maybe keep her married to him, and let Greta have her way with the design of the house. But as the Bauhaus faculty scattered from Europe just before World War II, Mies came to Chicago to head the architecture department at the Armour Institute of Technology, now IIT. There he found ready acceptance for his concepts. And there are basically, let the structure show. Let people see how the building gets its integrity, and use materials that help with that, glass and steel. The buildings that he designed at the IIT campus were a demonstration of his mastery of the new forms. On this project, there was no fussy client. The board members of the institution were eager to attract what Bauhaus antecedents had to offer. In the meanwhile, Edith Farnsworth, a daughter of a wealthy lumber baron, had concluded after 2 years of study in Italy with a prominent violinist that concertizing was not to be her life work. On the ship back to the U.S., she met a female doctor who made medical research sound exciting. She enrolled as a medical student and graduated from Northwestern in 1941 as one of 5 female doctors out of a class of 140. By 1947, Edith Farnsworth had become nationally famous for her work in kidney research and the early application of ACTH as a treatment for nephritis. She was 6 feet tall, smoked a good deal, as many people did then, and was a commanding presence on the hospital floor. I have the impression that she did not suffer fools gladly, and I'll let you read the book to see about that. Older men found her attractive, and they. Edith and Mies met at a dinner party at the apartment of a mutual friend. He was well connected with the Chicago Sophisticates and was a guest of honor. During the course of conversation that evening, Edith mentioned that she had recently purchased some acreage along the Fox River west of Chicago and was hoping to build a house for weekend getaways on it. As she described the site, Mies envisioned a chance to manifest the ideas that had been building in him, that is, to explore the essential purity of open construction in glass and steel in an ideal setting. Edith, for her part, was hoping that he might offer her the use of a junior member of his firm to design a weekend retreat. "I would love to build any kind of house for you," Mies replied. At that point, he had yet to build any habitable structure in America for a paying client. This is about 1946. I can imagine something like a wave of electricity passed through Edith on hearing him say that. Think about it. Try to put yourself in Edith's position there at that dinner party. Here was this tall, taciturn, massive stranger with the German accent offering to collaborate on building a dream house. It turned out subsequently that their respective dreams didn't match up. But at this point, and more so as they moved into the early stages of construction, that it was to be a highly creative and mutually exhilarating collaboration. She visited the architect's office often and would spend Saturday afternoons there, with his assistants eagerly explaining to her all the facets of designing a stunning residence. She would drive Mies and his assistants out to the site for picnics. Everyone was highly stimulated by the prospect of completing a project of such radical design. Between 1946 and 1948, Edith and Mies enjoyed each other's company. But how intimate were they? We do know that they traveled together to New York to visit a show at the Museum of Modern Art, where a model of what was to become the Farnsworth House was on display. And it's the one that Philip Johnson used as an inspiration to build his own glass house. She returned to Chicago alone, while Mies hung out in New York with a sculptress who could match him drink for drink. But basically, it's none of our business. That part of their relationship is not essential to our story. She was never in love with him, I contend. She was in love with an idea. And that is essential to our story. Mies, on the other hand, was in love with, or rather consumed by, an idea. And as the idea began to be actualized, the visions of the idea began to diverge. Now, this happens a lot in projects of all types. And allowances, compromises, or workarounds are found to complete these projects. This is a dramatic exception. Someone wrote, "The Farnsworth House is so light it could float away." And I'm going to show you some of those now. Oh, that's the glass house that Philip Johnson did, okay? It's not something you live in. It's basically a party house. It's rented out for big fundraising events and so forth in New Canaan, Connecticut. Okay, so here's now some all right, that's the drawing of the Farnsworth House. Here's the interior of it. I took that picture. There's another view. This is from the bedroom. So you see there's no full height walls. At least not in that view. Yep. Another view from inside looking outside. Looking to the outside. Here's something that I want to draw your attention to. The horizontal girders and the vertical columns look like they are stuck together by magnets. You can't see the welds. This is genius. At least it was thought so at that time. Well, someone has written that the Farnsworth House is so light that it could float away. Well, it almost did. It's on the display. It's on the Fox River, only about 5 feet from the normal river's height. And I have a photograph that I may show you later of people going up to the terrace of the house in canoes. Well, a substitute name for Mies could have been less is more. According to one commentator, the Farnsworth house left other architects little to do except to make more perfect what already had been perfected. It was a small house, but was it invisible? Well, sort of. You had to know where to look. Was it irreproducible? Probably. Uninhabitable? Well, we'll see. Mies not only designed the house, he also supervised its construction, especially the details that interested him. For example, as I said, the welds of the vertical columns and horizontal columns you can't see. Mies was very fond of travertine marble because it looks and is extremely expensive. The marble is used on both the upper and lower decks, terraces, which aren't shown in that picture, but maybe I can find another one where it is, where you can see it. Okay, here's a detail of the vertical and horizontal attachment. Well, as I started to say, the marble was used in both the upper and lower terrace outside. The terrace is as big as the house, by the way, and throughout the floor in the living space. It was even used in the fireplace until more practical colleagues intervened. Mies inspected every slab of marble that came to the site and graded it personally, either to accept, reject, or hold it for additional consideration. This is very inefficient use of an architect's time. But it reveals to me a lot about how Mies operated. At one point, there was some confusion over which of the two piles of slabs, the accepted and the not yet rejected, was which. It was about this time that Edith began first to question whether the house was being built for her or for him. Was she the client or the patron on this project? It's not clear. One of Mies' assistants recalled Dr. Farnsworth saying, "Mies, build it as if you were building your own house." The understanding was that she would let him use it sometimes. I think that was the spirit of the whole thing, he said. It was also a thing in which he was interested because he had full control of it. He had control of every detail here. It was understood that it would be built as beautifully as could be done, and that she would pay for it. The initial cost of the project was estimated at about $10,000 in 1946. Because of inflation, delays, and expensive materials, the cost quickly rose to $40,000. Still okay. This was to be a unique house. To keep the lines clean and uncluttered, there were to be no full height interior walls except for the bathroom and the furnace room. It certainly wasn't any contractor's dream house. The plumber on the job suggested she name the project My Misconception. The landscape contractor was asked to grade the site to a tolerance of a 1/16 of an inch. Lumps of dirt are bigger than that. He told Mies to go to hell. And Mies found someone else for the job. Throughout a project, an architect must make compromises. For reasons of cost or scheduling, or to bend to the client's preferences. Good architects do this well enough to make a living. Great architects do this with elan, convincing the client that the ultimately agreed upon design solution, which is his, is the solution that the client was really seeking but was too inarticulate to express. Mies, though, did not win every battle with Dr. Farnsworth. He lost on the fireplace. He lost on the kitchen stove. I mean, that's kind of a minor skirmish, I might say. But he lost on that. She wanted enamel, and he wanted stainless steel. She got her way. But he did get his way with the curtains. She wanted some color in the interior. Mies had strong ideas in another direction. Quoting one of Mies's associates at the time, she wanted yellow curtains, and Mies wanted beige, the color of natural silk. It's a gorgeous color. Mies wanted that, and his idea was perfectly obvious and objective to us at the office. These are architects talking amongst themselves, you see. Because these beautiful trees around were golden, natural golden, and red in the fall. Why put a yellow or any kind of strong color there that would be in competition with these beautiful natural colors? The floor was travertine, and it worked together and made sense. This is from the architect's point of view. A few years later, apropos of that issue, Edith remarked, quote, "It was not that Mr. Van der Rohe wanted any opinion from me on the curtains. He wanted a certain kind of curtain, and the question was whether I would agree to it." Then there was the furniture. She received a bill for some Barcelona chairs, a glass coffee table, and some spring chairs sent by Mies. Since they were ordered without her approval, she wrote him that she would not accept them nor pay for them. Mies was shocked. He fully expected to furnish the house with his ideas of perfection. But have you ever sat in a Barcelona chair? They are beautiful. But once you sit in one, you cannot get up out of it gracefully. And if you're past a certain age, you need to be helped out of it. There are many other fascinating details I could report on, but I'm going to skip ahead to the first night that Dr. Farnsworth actually slept in her new house, as yet not finished. It was New Year's Eve of 1950. According to Alex Beam, snow was on the ground and the trees were bare. A neighbor, noticing the house had its lights on, called her up and invited her over to spend New Year's Eve with them. She accepted, but realized then that she did not have the privacy she'd been so looking forward to. At their house, the neighbors recounted stories of the Fox River flooding from time to time. Back in her house later that night, she felt uneasy, partly because of the uncurtained glass walls, and partly from the fear of what she called Mies's implacable intentions. How could things which started so well come to such a pass? At the beginning, Edith and Mies were like teenagers on the beach, splashing and playing in the waves. In their giddy excitement, both ventured deeper and further from shore. Now she felt the undertow. Mies also admitted later that if he had known how difficult she would be, he never would have taken on the job. On the other hand, if she hadn't been so smart and articulate and owned a primo sight for crystallizing the logical extension of his design principles, he wouldn't have been attracted to her in the first place. The stars are aligning here. So there's some magic in a creative relationship of this sort. It's like going on an adventure together. You know there will be obstacles and setbacks, but you are confident that together you will surmount them. There are mutual projections going on, which are magnetizing, but also dangerous. It's a bit like transference. I may be misusing that term. I have my eye on you because I'm not sure that's right. But anyway, I think you get what I'm after here. So that's why it's handy to have a contractor involved that both parties trust. As a practical person, a contractor is typically immune to vaporous hopes, ideas, or preferences that in time or in cost are not to be taken seriously. In projects at Upjohn, in my experience, and in my own domestic projects, I found the practical person to be a great help in resolving misunderstandings and misconceptions. For all great projects, I'd say all three principal actors, that is, the owner, the designer, and the general contractor, must be confident in themselves, masterful even, but not pig-headed. In this case, only the owner and the designer were present. Mies was his own contractor because he couldn't find a local one who was willing to work with him. What made up for that were Mies's assistants, particularly Myron Goldsmith and William Dunlap, who admired Mies's perfection and attention to design detail, but also had the interpersonal skills that Mies regarded as superfluous. I would also have to say that as the charm of Mies's reputation and ego wore off, his pig-headedness became visible to all. Still, it's a great project. In addition, Dr. Farnsworth has since become an exemplar of competent and assertive womanhood, at least as far as I'm concerned. In August of 1951, Mies's office told Dr. Farnsworth that they had spent $69,868 on the project, which still wasn't completed. This was $10,000 more than she was expecting, so she wrote Mies a letter asking that no further amount should be committed and that the order for screening the porch be canceled. Mosquitoes were really bad out there, as you can imagine, so the screen, giving up the screens is pretty serious. About that time, Edith mentioned to one of Mies's assistants that, quote, Mies and I have never discussed a fee for this house. According to his assistant, and I'm quoting now, apparently she had trouble bringing it up, and she never brought it up. She said, I wonder if I should offer to let him use it. We will work out an arrangement so he can use it when I'm not using it. I also want to give him something, perhaps a painting. He explained, I'm sure she had been thinking of a major painting. I did not mention this to Mies, but I thought, my God, this thing has been going on for years and they have never discussed it? Typically, an architect's fee is at least 10% of the total project cost. So you can see that an abyss of misunderstanding and unverified assumptions lies at the bottom of this. To clarify the situation, Edith wrote Mies that she was turning the matter over to her attorney and requested that he provide an affidavit giving details of the work, the cost of materials, and so forth. Her attorney, Randolph Borer, was a former client of hers, a former patient of hers. He proved to be a ferocious advocate on her behalf and worked for her pro bono as near as Alex Beam could tell. And I think Alex did a pretty thorough job of researching this. Borer credited Edith for saving his life a few months earlier when he was suffering from imminent kidney failure. Mies, for all his brilliance as an architect, was certainly no businessman and not even a good office manager. Philip Johnson, the Sun-Times admirer and competitor of Mies, offered him the use of his own business manager to help straighten things out. Looking over the books, he spotted an accounts receivable figure of $4,500 for unpaid construction expenses. Let's collect that amount, he said. Negotiations ensued. Reaching an impasse, Wiley, it's an apt name for this guy, suggested that Mies get in touch with one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. Their senior partner suggested that Mies sue Farnsworth. Myron Goldsmith, who had known the principals in this dispute from the very beginning, later remarked, quote, I think this is one of the most unfortunate things that could have happened. So there was a suit and a countersuit, non-payment versus architectural malpractice. She had a pretty good case on that, too. And the AIA did some investigating of Mises' behavior here, and I think it was kind of quietly hushed, but he definitely got the message that, that some of his practices that may be commonplace in Germany are not acceptable in the U.S., like being your own contractor, not working without a signed contract with your client, et cetera, et cetera. In the subsequent trial, held at the Plano courthouse in camera, neither Mies nor Edith showed their best sides. For her part, Edith claimed not to have seen the plans for the house before construction, was not consulted on major matters until they were essentially fait accompli, and that the whole project was managed unprofessionally. For Mies, it was a matter of collecting payment for work done. But Edith's lawyer was merciless. He took advantage of Mises' inarticulateness in his second language and his general lack of interest in anything that didn't involve design. Unfortunately for Mies, what lawyers call a bad fact emerged during the trial. A summer storm caused massive water damage to the silk curtains, the furniture, and the floor due to failure of the roof seal along the perimeter of the whole house. There was no flashing. Just think about it. Only mastic had been used, which over time had shrunk and pulled away from the roof edges. Photographs and expert testimony cast the visionary architect, the great Mies, in a very harsh light. The findings in the case, however, were quite favorable to Mies, in spite of all that. But the judge who was to rule on these findings professed not to have the time to read them, and essentially disappeared from the case. So there it sat for several years, just casting a stink over everybody's reputation. Help for Edith eventually came from an unexpected source, the editor of House Beautiful magazine. Her name is Edith Gordon. She was a formidable arbiter of taste for millions of prosperous Americans during the Cold War era. She idolized Frank Lloyd Wright and his followers, particularly because they were American. The international style, that is Mises style, she regarded as sterile and uninhabitable. Glass and steel isn't warm and cozy. Few housewives wanted that, except maybe Greta Tugendhat. Edith Farnsworth, no housewife, thought she did want that. Then Gordon published this in the April 1953 issue of House Beautiful. Quoting now, some museums, some professional magazines for architects and decorators, some architectural schools, and some designers, ... are promoting unlivability, stripped down emptiness, lack of storage space, and therefore lack of possessions, ... Now she has our attention. She even went so far as to imply that these foreign architects were attacking American values. This is the Cold War. Everybody was on edge about this stuff like this. I don't know if, well, some of us are old enough. I guess we're all old enough to remember what that was like. Well, not you. Okay. Yeah. Well, the knockout punches came from a reporter who had interviewed Edith. He asked her, "Does this house provide implacable calm?" Another magazine article had claimed that it did. Dr. Farnsworth responded, "The truth is that in this house with its 4 walls of glass, I feel like a prowling animal, always on the alert. I can't relax. I wanted to do something meaningful, Farnsworth told the reporter, but all I got was this glib, false sophistication. The conception of a glass house suspended in air is ridiculous. See, her articulateness now is turned around 180 degrees. it's not charming Mr. Mies van der Rohe anymore. Newsweek piled on, quoting Edith at length. Under the slogan of simplicity, this theory of architecture has discarded the accumulated wisdom of building. This handsome pavilion I own is almost completely unworkable. There is a certain brutality about having the outside inside. The windows steam up in winter and drive you crazy. You feel like you're in a car in a rainstorm with a windshield wiper that won't work. To complete the story, Mies, concerned that negative publicity would drive away clients, eventually agreed to settle on terms quite favorable to Edith. She continued to live in her glass cage until 1968, when the Illinois Highway Department acquired some of her property to build a bridge nearby across the Fox River. All the while, she enjoyed complaining about the house. When she retired, she sold the house to Peter Palumbo for somewhere between $120,000 and $250,000. When the National Trust for Historic Preservation purchased the property from Mr. Palumbo in 2000, they paid $6.7 million for it. Now, that was not all profit for Mr. Palumbo, though, because during the 30 years that he owned it, he spent a great deal of money refurbishing it and completing it the way he thought Mies intended it to be completed. The Farnsworth house, like the supersonic transport, was impractical. Still, both are beautiful, and I'm glad they were both built and used. The Farnsworth house got built because, for a brief time, the stars of Mies and Edith aligned. Both had visions of an ideal and collaborated closely to manifest it. For him, the ideal was a pure expression of the design principles he had espoused for decades. For her, it was to live comfortably in a breathtaking work of art. The result was a landmark structure that bent the curve of recent architectural history. And just about that time, postmodernism came along, which was definitely a reaction to the international style. And we can go into that some other time. So I'm going to whip through just a few more slides here to just illustrate something. Oh, say there's the Farnsworth house nearly underwater. This is an example of the international style in Kalamazoo, the old Steinman Realty building on South Westnedge. It's now the Recovery House. It's not very pretentious, but there it is. Now here's an example of what you need to have as a site to really show off the Mies style. This is the Stahl House in Los Angeles, and it's used in movie sets, many movie sets. It's available for rent for such purposes. And so you can see that the style of architecture lends itself to this kind of site. So I think that's about all, except here's the takeaways. Well, that concludes my talk. So I'd be happy to answer your questions or share any stories you want to share about your architect-client relationships. You have been so fortunate or unfortunate to have them.
So I've got a quick question for you. When you went to Plano, were you aware that Plano is famous for producing fishing tackle boxes?
No, I was not. I did not know that.
Oh, okay.
It was about my first trip west of Chicago, in which I actually stopped in Illinois. Normally, I'm heading straight on.
There
further
aren't
west.
many good reasons to stop in Illinois. But if you get back there,
Okay,
a
all
fishing
right.
tackle box.
All right, good.
Jack, this is an observation. If you could put that last slide of the steel house up again,
Okay.
if it's not too much trouble.
Yeah, it's going to have to come back here.
Okay, well,
Well, it will. Yeah.
you had it for a moment and it went away. The last slide, the steel house in
Oh,
Los
the
Angeles.
stall house. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you go, I'm almost positive, there's a very famous painting by the British painter David Hockney of that house in the Art Institute of Chicago.
Okay. Well, it's been well photographed, and I'm sure it's.
Not particularly flattering to the owners of the house, but David Hockney didn't do that kind of thing. He is still the kind of overpowering artist that
Well, he was probably attracted.
meets with.
He was probably attracted to that pool. Don't you think?
Yeah. Now this is a question. How did Mies get along with the equally imperious Frank Lloyd Wright?
Well, they had kind of a love-hate relationship. Frank Lloyd Wright introduced Mies to the Chicago Architectural Society when he first arrived in Chicago, and he spent about 2 minutes introducing Mies, and then spent the next half hour talking about Frank Lloyd Wright. Mies had retired by this time into the bar next door at the Palmer House. He wasn't hanging around. But you could tell Wright would say some things that were kind of had double-edged meanings to them. Eventually they had a falling out, and they didn't hang out together much. A lot of that is in this book. If you want to learn more about it, it's worth, because Frank Lloyd Wright, whatever you want to say about him, is a colorful and acerbic person. And the way he phrases things, they're pretty memorable. Not so much with Mies. Yes. Broken Glass. I have a copy of it in my backpack, and it's a good read. Yeah. 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 Well, I remember when he did our house, he was very upset that the contractor who he got at the last minute, because his favorite contractors had already gotten booked. He hired an inexperienced contractor, and there was a place where 3 planes were to come together to a point. Well, the contractor forgot to account for the furring strip, the little edge that goes in front of the shelves, to throw that off. And it really, the look of disappointment on Gordy's face when he saw that was pretty obvious. So I think if any chance of it ever showing up in House Beautiful was gone once that happened. And so, but anyway, we had a wonderful time with him, and we were very grateful for his help.
We had a wonderful time with Gordy also, but again, there's that ego
Yeah?
a couple of times, and he's very, emotional person. And it was fabulous to work with. He became a friend, or was a friend before, and still stayed a friend after, but there were a few iffy times, here and there.
Yeah. Well.
It kept us working for many years to pay for.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, in our case, Gordy took the precaution of having the contractor sign what's known as an AIA contract, which is very favorable to the owner. So any mistakes the contractor makes, or any even oversights that the architect makes, the contractor is responsible for. Well, experienced contractors, when they get ready to sign these things, ask for changes and additions to correct that.
Yeah.
Well, this young guy didn't know to do that.
Uh-huh.
So consequently, he went way, way over budget. He had to redo about a third of the job because his journeyman didn't make the risers even height on the stairways,
Okay.
even.
Yeah. We worked with another contractor once, and it was, another architect earlier on, Evie Askin. You might know her from Western, yeah. And she was worth her weight in gold because the contractors, any contractor we've ever dealt with just for a remodel of a kitchen or anything else, oh, well, they're positive people. They are just, well, it'll work out, and it may be way over budget, but it'll be fine. Yeah, well, again, that's when the architect became the intermediary there, kind of, yeah.
Well, it's definitely it's a three-legged stool there, and it needs to be there. In this case, the contractor was missing. Clearly, any contractors that he had were subcontractors, and Mies could dominate them and send them away and get somebody else, or get his assistants to basically do the scut work of interacting with a journeyman. Yes.
Jack, I wanted to ask if, as promised in your notes, if you have time, you'll share a little secret about Lakeshore Towers in Chicago, some scandalous story you may have picked up.
Yeah, it seemed scandalous at the time. Shortly after we moved to Kalamazoo, I was at a cocktail party, and Bob Tower of Tower Prankster was there, and I was gushing about Lakeshore Towers or just architecture in general, just kind of smooching up to him a bit. And you recall maybe Bob Tower's pretty tall. He looked down at me and he said, "Jack, do you realize? Were you aware that the Lakeshore Towers doesn't have any laundry chutes?" He's overlooked that. So all the bedding and everything has to be carted down to the first floor or through the passenger elevators. Yeah, so, yeah.
Mies, after the experience with Edith Farnsworth, came up with a comment that the devil is in the details. But from what I've read, he never said that. He said God is in the details.
Yes.
But after the experience with Edith, this became the legend that was his lesson that came away from the construction project.
Yeah, I think God is in the details is more accurate.
Yes.
He wasn't a religious person, but he was very spiritual. He was very attracted to the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas and seemed to be puzzling over a lot of the big mysteries. But he wasn't a practicing religious person at all. And he and Edith used to have discussions on heady matters like this when they were on good terms, apparently. I didn't go into that because it's not exactly on topic, but it's in the book.
Any other
Yes.
questions?
Did any local architects, such as Gordy Rogers and so forth, have contact with Mies?
Well, the closest I can come is that the Art Institute in Kalamazoo is built by or designed by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill of Chicago, and the principals in that firm were all students of these Vanderrohe. Yeah. The quadrifoil columns that are there, that's a Mies kind of trope right there. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Deb has talked about Gordy Rogers, and we were good friends for quite some time and so forth. I once said to Gordy, the things that you draw are often wonderful and so forth. Do you do churches? And he said, "Oh, no. No, you'd have to work with a committee if you were going to design a church." So my sense of Gordy and the architects and what we're talking about now is that they worship at a different altar. And the altar is the altar of design.
Yes.
that word takes on a particular significance and means something special to them
Yes.
in kinds of ways that they don't necessarily describe very well. Although, if
But
you,
but in the fraternity, they understand it.
yes, and so the notion of bringing design to a world that does not yet understand that is a holy quest.
Yeah.
And I think trying to wrap our minds around what is meant by design in that sense is an important piece of all of this. And the commodification of that is a sort of other topic that we're talking about with the contracts and so forth. But the notion that can I take this space and make it better than nature designed it is a significant challenge.
You
for
have
these
to have
folks.
some kind of super ego to have that conception and to be able to follow it through with contractors and clients and cost constraints and time constraints and everything else. You have to understand why some architects have big egos. And Frank, yeah. Go ahead.
So I have a follow-up question then. So how did we take the leap from Notre Dame to the post, the type of architecture we're talking about? What?
Oh,
I
I would just say the Enlightenment, the whole notion of mankind being able to outdo God at on anything in particular. The priesthood of all believers. When we start thinking, well, listen, I can do that. There's a lot of ego and a lot of wealth to be made if you can sell people on your idea, right? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you have ever been in the Falling Water House, in the living room with a low ceiling, you're standing on a rock that is actually part of the earth in the living room. And you're looking out through these long spans of windows, and you see all of untrampled nature out there. You can feel like you're like safe and secure and in charge. It's a wonderful feeling. I have a friend, acquaintance, he claimed he had an epiphany there, just from that site. So it's powerful stuff, and sometimes various components of the partnership fall short. But I'm telling you, Carol and I both really were in awe of great architects. Carol went to Japan and spent 2 weeks just touring works by Tadao Ando and others in Japan. She had the money, she had the time, she had the free airline tickets she could get from her sister. So she did it, and she had a wonderful time. So I guess that's about it, maybe.
Thank you. Terrific. Now we have to look around more carefully in Kalamazoo. I was driving up that street that winds up from the Lutheran Church and the Y toward the Kalamazoo Country Club, and I looked back, and there were an area around Glenwood, or what your old house used to be. It looked like a house that sprouted new decks, or something was going on. Interesting.
Yeah, there's a house, I think it's owned by Pete, the guy, Pete Woodruff. Yeah, at the corner of University and Bronson Boulevard. That's his house. That's Gordy's house.
Oh, it's. Opportunity.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
it was interesting, just preparing remarks to introduce Jack, and I found a few quotes from architects about buildings. And one I kind of bang out of that fits with me and some of these people, quote, "I don't know why people hire architects and then tell them what to do." That's from Frank Gehry. Shocked, the ego. But then on the other hand, there's Frank Lloyd Wright, A doctor can bury his mistakes, but an architect can only advise his clients to plant vines.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, this was great, and thank you for coming. I hope you've enjoyed our talk tonight, and thank you, Jack. Next week, or pardon me, next month, February 16th, we have a presentation by Dr. Mike Cagney on an appropriate topic for Valentine's Month, the heart, the history of cardiology. So
All right.
it will
Okay.
be a very interesting evening, too. So thank you for coming.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
So thank you very much, and drive safely.